ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Watch More Movies. I'm your host, Ricky, and thank you for sticking with the show. I know it took a week off, but I am back with a very, very special episode. Today, we are going to be diving into another personal favorite director of mine, Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo is one of the most unique horror filmmakers out there. While he does have scares and horror throughout, and I did just label him as a horror filmmaker, his films are never about the terror and the scares. It is about the characters in them and the humanity that we and he try to find in these characters or creatures or monsters. Much of what is about the beauty and the horrors of the real world, or about the beauty in imperfection. His newest release from Netflix, Frankenstein, is out now, limited theaters, and it will be on Netflix as this episode airs, November 7th. My wife and I got the chance to see this on the 17th of October, early at the Chicago International Film Festival. It was a great experience being there, supporting his newest film, and it's my favorite theater in the world at the Music Box. The film itself, I am a bit more mixed on, but we'll get to that in a little bit. With this episode, I want to talk about what makes his film so meaningful and impactful to cinema, why he's necessary to it as a whole, and what makes him so unique about each of his films. The first film is his feature-length debut, Cronos. Cronos follows an antique shop owner who, unbeknownst to him, is in possession of a statue that contains a relic that, once it bites into you, turns you into a vampire. I really like Cronos. It is funnier than I expected it to be, and a lot deeper too. Our main character, Jesus, is someone who cares for his family and loves his granddaughter. He's not someone who has this appetite for power or for the greater things aside from his own and his family's happiness. In comes Angel, the American nephew of a rich businessman who has been in search of this artifact and relic that he feels can give him eternal life. He has dozens of similar statues in his compound, but it is inside the statues that he hopes to find this artifact. The juxtaposition of these two older men are very fascinating. One is in search of eternal life and the power it can bestow, while the other is cursed with it. Jesus, after being bitten by this thing, this relic, begins to exude all the signs of a vampire you would see. Hunger for blood, an increase in sexual appetite for his wife, his skin starts to age even faster than his already older age, and he has a newfound confidence that he normally never had. The diving into this character in the form of a vampire is fantastic. You see things he's missing out on in his age that he at one point lost. Like I said, his libido, for lack of a better word, for his wife, his confidence, and he wants to be these things but slowly starts to die and is addicted to this feeling more than he should be, and that changes him a person and that destroys himself and who he is. It even really touches on the subject of addiction and does well in tandem with his relationship with his granddaughter. Cronos is also a very funny movie, and a lot of that is thanks to the businessman's American nephew, Angel, played by Ron Perlman. He has such charisma to him, and his jokes never feel out of place, even for a quiet and intimate vampire film. His frustration with his uncle and his frustration with the obstacles in his way play really well and add a lot of comic relief just at the right times. I do recommend this vampire film. It is really good, but it is slower in pace than I would have liked personally, but you can already see in his first film, see what Del Toro has to offer and what he loves about people, their desires, and their imperfections. Now, usually with these director dives, I go in order of the filmography. With this case, I want to kind of go out of order a little bit. With these next two films, I want to pair together. They kind of go well together in a way. It is Del Toro's second and fourth feature. The first one is Mimic. It's his first English language film from 1997. It's about a virus that spreads through New York City that is killing children, that is spread by these cockroaches. Due to not being able to find a cure, Deputy Director of the CDC finds a way to fight this disease off by creating a hybrid insect that can kill off these cockroaches spreading the disease. And this works until it doesn't, and they discover that the hybrid has been reproducing and mutating into larger creatures. This is probably one of the more turn your brain off kind of fun movies from Del Toro. To me, it comes off as a movie that, as a visionary, he had strong ideas for, and he really wanted to make something cool for American audiences. It has some of his signature grand production design, spectacular lighting, and a cool premise that he executes on an aesthetic level. Where it falls is the conventional way that the film plays out. The characters are mostly thin with depth, certain scenes feel forced with action and out of tone, and the dialogue is pretty one-dimensional in terms of how people talk, or just very cookie cutter, very sort of apparent American filmmaking. Not to say that it's not without skill, of course it is, and it's not bad at all by any means, but it just doesn't feel like his own as what he's used to doing. You can absolutely see that he wanted to make a film that was damning the medical industry and the government, and how we pass along the consequences of our actions to people below us, or people that we don't feel have really any worth, as far as like the government, like I said, the medical industry. Now, for Blade 2, I think I saw Blade 2 as a kid. I'm almost positive I did. I've not seen the Blade movie since. I didn't go back and rewatch the first or the third one. I just wanted to watch the one that Guillermo made. It is refreshing to see a director jump into giant blockbuster filmmaking in between personal ones and make it his own. Not really diving into the story too much here, and I will keep this one brief just because it doesn't really feel like a big deal or a big stamp on his filmography, but Blade 2 is a lot of fun. There are several scenes that you can tell Del Toro had so much fun coming up with and shooting. It can give a horror feeling with the vampires, of course, but also have a style that really feels like his own action, and some slow motion beats, and also really just grand shots, even in these dark sewer areas. I don't remember Blade 1 or 3 to be honest, but there is certain shots, like I said, that scream Guillermo in this, and on its own, it was really good watching. I put these two movies together because, let's just say for these, but because they also both feel like studio jobs and less like passion projects. I don't want to come off like I'm speaking for the passion or lack thereof, because knowing Guillermo, he is passionate about everything he does. But these feel more like, I like this project, I want to put my stamp on it and give it my all, and then inevitably the studio system does what it does. Both are good, not even at all bad, but not what he's fully capable of. And if these are the worst two films in someone's filmography, you're definitely doing something right. All right, now for his third feature film, it was in between Mimic and Blade 2. It is The Devil's Backbone. After a young 12-year-old boy, Carlos, arrives at an orphanage, he begins to discover darker secrets within this orphanage and its past. Against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War, this is classic Guillermo in his comfort zone, a period piece against a societal or global conflict involving ghostly elements. As Carlos is beginning to make his way day to day and trying to fit in with these other younger boys, he discovers a ghostly child resides inside the property. After Mimic, you can tell Guillermo really wanted to make something back to his style and roots so that he could fully flesh out his ideas. Something that is also a thread throughout his films, like I mentioned, is he creates films that are tragedies and metaphors that all tie to either societal issues or global conflicts, include supernatural conflicts and elements, and reflect on us individually as humans and what it means to be human in the middle of these events, without bogging down into the day-to-day of making it a war movie or solely about the issue or the societal issue at hand. For most of the runtime, this does not play like any traditional horror ghost story. It is an intimate portrait of a child growing up and trying to deal with grief, as are all these characters who are in this extreme circumstance. When it comes to the adults in this village, there are so many dynamics at play here. You have Dr. Casares, I think that's how you said it, who loves the headmistress, Carmen. They have a past history as he knew her husband before he died in the war, and she is also deeply in love with him, but is fulfilling her intimate needs by way of the groundskeeper, who has his own ulterior motives. There are a lot of tangled motives and relationships here, but none of it feels flashy or convoluted just for the sake of it. They've been all dealing with, and currently dealing with, all this war trauma that affects them all, and justified or not, are coping in their own ways. Without spoiling too much, Jacinto, the groundskeeper, is tragic in his own way. You find out about his past and how that would affect someone in his shoes, and how that turns someone into a cynical, greedy, and vengeful person, and just how tragic it is on that level. The Devil's Backbone is one I know I want to rewatch in the near future again because there's so much to unpack and dig into. It is a heartbreaking look at loss and lifelong tragedy in a war-torn country. I highly recommend this one if you want to dig into his Spanish language films. Now, for these next two, I'm going to kind of combine them. They're a film and then it's a sequel, and they're out of order, but it's just easier to talk about them together. That is Hellboy and then Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. This was, I believe, the first time that Hellboy was adapted from the comics to a live screen adaptation. It stars Ron Perlman as the titular Hellboy, who was brought in from, again, I don't quite remember to be honest, otherworldly stuff during World War II when Hitler was at at the height of his power, and the U.S. government decides to take this little baby creature and raise him and hopefully use him to help fight off whatever otherworldly creatures invade Earth. And these are essentially, if you like superhero movies and that kind of outline and that guidebook to a movie, this is definitely on the upper echelon of that kind of mold in superhero movies. It is funny. There is so much texture to this world that Guillermo creates. It feels like his own original idea. Obviously, they are comic books, but the world that he inhabits and he sets this in is so Guillermo. And when you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But there is sort of a old timey but also modern approach to how he does this and how he creates these worlds, and the action itself as well is so much fun. A lot of it is hand to hand combat, and it doesn't feel slow. It doesn't feel motionless, but it also feels very just visceral, as well as all this live act. Not live action, but the big CGI set pieces also have a lot more tangibility feel to them, even though there's big worm creatures and big beams in the sky type of stuff, but they don't feel like they're big CGI just garbage thrown at the screen. The characters themselves are so much fun, and so you invest in them so quickly because of how they're portrayed and how they feel like a family. And that is one of the things I love about this. Well, obviously, Hellboy is the marquee character, and he is the star of the show, so to speak. It feels like a family, and it feels like a team that these characters all are a part of. And one thing I love about these movies is the fact that Guillermo can still put his stamp on this. Aside from it being a great superhero film and then its sequel, they also feel like films that are Guillermo trying to say, look at how we treat others, look at how we treat people who are not like us, and how we can be better people for if we don't revert to that. Hellboy is, hidden. He's kept hidden away from the world, even though there are otherworldly things attacking Earth. They don't want people to see that the government's working with this creature, this being, because of how different he is and how people will be scared. And all he wants to do, aside from help people, is just be seen and feel like that people like him. Not for the reason of success and fame the traditional way, but in the way that he just wants to be a part of society. He doesn't want to feel like he's hiding himself. And that obviously comes into a personal conflict and raises a lot of questions about fame versus just being liked and wanting to be a part of everything. But Ron Perlman is just incredible in this role, and I couldn't imagine anyone else aside from him playing this role. I know they did two of the reboots in the last few years. I watched one of them, Never Again, and then the other one I just did not give my time to. But these are completely Guillermo movies. They do not feel like studio superhero slop that you see today. They feel like a lost relic of blockbuster filmmaking and comic book movies that we just don't get anymore today. And if you've never seen Hellboy or Hellboy 2 The Golden Army, I really, really encourage you to watch it, especially if you are more gravitating toward like the superhero genre and stuff like that. Definitely watch Hellboy and Hellboy 2 The Golden Army. Now for what I consider to be his best film, what many consider to be his best film, it is Pan's Labyrinth. Following a young girl moving into the countryside with her pregnant mother and her new, what we perceive to be stepfather, the head of a military outfit off the countryside of Spain, as she's discovering her new home and the yards around it, she discovers a labyrinth around the grounds of the home, and through this discovery, she encounters a fairy, and this fairy takes her into the underparts of this labyrinth, and she meets a faun who tells her that in a previous life she was a princess, and in order to maintain being princess, she has to do certain things, and that's where the story starts. What I love about this movie, I think, is that it really captures a heartbreaking and sad moment in every person's life, but especially at this fragile state and fragile age where you were kind of thrust into growing up and you have to endure tragedy and suffering at such a young age, which obviously many people can relate to. And it is such a beautiful story, but also so Guillermo in this fact in the aesthetic sense. There are creatures, there are sweeping, you know, um, caves and just set pieces that are such his personality that you feel like almost like he's telling his own story through this story of this young girl being a princess in a former life and having to go through this. Honestly, I don't know much about his personal life outside of that, but this story feels like his most personal, and I think that's what resonates with me, myself personally, is that I really connect to filmmakers who you can see either a part of their life or something that just was ripped out from the deepest part of their soul onto the screen. And whether it be creatures, costumes, or just the heartbreak of this story and what this little girl goes through, that I resonate on a just human level. Even if I haven't gone through those exact things, just feeling those things with her is, it's a very heartbreaking story to watch, but it is such full of wonder and awe that you can't help but feel like you are in her shoes at that moment. The main character Ophelia is a very like many children, very curious child, and you really want to protect her from all these things, but even these magical forces at play can't protect her from what is real life. And no matter how much we look up to, greater things to protect us from these things, she, just like her, we can't stop these, and nothing really can in life. And it got really deep for a second there, but if you're just looking to watch a movie that will just wrap you up in a very beautiful world with incredibly cool and detailed, I don't know what that was, very detailed sort of aesthetics, Pan's Labyrinth is one of them. I don't want to get too much in the story. It's a period piece set in Spain, and with a military sort of background, but it isn't like Guillermo's other movies. Aesthetically, of course, there's some things that are very similar, but this is, I'm just talking about Guillermo's work at all, and I hope to recommend this movie to people. I just really don't want to get into this one too specifically because there's so much to discover with Pan's Labyrinth that if you've never seen it, it's something that I feel like you're robbing yourself of without seeing it. So I really hope you do. And I know for a filmmaker that I'm so passionate about and for being his favorite film of mine, I'm being very vague. But this is one that is so special that I don't like to give too much about what it looks like or what it is about or what happens, just because I really hope this is a movie that people can experience themselves for the first time and really just immerse yourself and get just emotionally weeping by the end of it. So, Pan's Labyrinth, go check it out. Rent it if you need to. It is worth every minute of your time. Alright, so for 2013's Pacific Rim, it is a fascinating case to me where it simply is something that just would not happen today. Like many big budget films in the 2010s that are a relic of what was the tail end of mostly original blockbuster filmmaking, obviously there's still some today, but not nearly as many risks as there would be back then. And even earlier than that. This was an original story co-created by Del Toro and a huge budget robot versus monster movie that is honestly just a huge blast. This is one you can see bleed through the screen that Del Toro loved making with every fiber of his being and had such passion for. After a giant kaiju attack hits Earth, one follows the other and mankind has to band together to stop them and create what they call Jaegers. giant robots that can combat and fight the kaiju. This is all summed up pretty well with an exposition dump right out in front with a voiceover from our main character Riley, played by Charlie Hunnam. This is probably some of the more ridiculous on the face plot and type of big tentpole film for most audiences, robot versus monsters, but Del Toro does it with such love and maturity for the craft that it is honestly one of the most fun films in his filmography, as well as one of the most epic. You feel the scale and power of these Jaegers and kaiju, a film that does it better than most these days, where it doesn't feel like the city and citizens being destroyed as cannon fodder or just background noise and, CGI garbage thrown at the screen, but tangible, and the gritty streets in this world are oozing with color and texture. It's also one of those that, in and of itself, is just gorgeous. His use of neon and color against darkness is really a testament to his vision and giving this earth a personality and not just muted tones. If you like the idea of kaijus versus Jaegers or robots and want some real giant scale action, I highly recommend Pacific Rim. I remember there was a sequel and I did see it. I don't remember much about it. It wasn't directed by Del Toro, and I thought it was fun, but nowhere nearing having the personality of Del Toro's first. 2015's Crimson Peak, I feel, is one film that, to me, has improved. I remember seeing it in the theater and not being huge on it, but also probably at the time, not really appreciating or really diving deep as much as I have today. Taking place at the very beginning of the 20th century in Victorian England, we follow Edith Cushing, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, when Thomas Sharp, played by Tom Hiddleston, comes to Cushing to seek investment for a machine that can dig up his family's clay mines. His proposal is rejected, and we have our story started of love, history, gothic horror, and family. There's a lot going on here, and I appreciated more the second time watching it on what Del Toro was trying to say and do with Crimson Peak. He is showing how the past inadvertently influences much of what the future tries to correct, but how it is not so much different, and how the future is not beholden to the past but can't escape or not acknowledge what comes before too. I will likely say it more than once here, but what I love about Del Toro's body of work is he makes his world building feel so real and tangible, but gives you something new that you haven't seen before, or something he's adding on to what he's tried to do before. And it's something you may have seen before, but it's his style and all of his own. Crimson Peak is one of those examples where it is historic and quite gothic feeling, but there is a heightened sense of reality, aside from obviously the supernatural aspects. He definitely leans into this with his subsequent films. The fictional parts of work are just additive and complementary to the real world he has created, and it helps humanize the elements around and invest you even more emotionally. The cast here are all terrific, with standout performance from Tom Hiddleston, who gets to showcase his classic movie star charm that he couldn't quite get to me personally with the Marvel movies. Those felt like a character that was made to be it, whereas this one, he feels like he's bringing that to the character. He is more methodical and subdued, but conveys so much underneath the surface from day one. What I think hinders the film for me a bit, from a performance standpoint, are the touches of one-note objective nature of Jessica Chastain's Lucille Sharp, Thomas's sister. You get one or two scenes of them talking about their past and how it affected them, but the character felt like she could have used one or two more scenes, or, of just give her some more depth. It wasn't some caricature, or it wasn't some one-note thing, but I think an aspect that could have been improved upon. While the gothic horror aesthetic is not something that is at the forefront or something to catch your attention, it's the story. As far as the style in a horrific way, it's used so well to put these characters in it. You have both the Sharps and Cushings dealing with ghosts of their past, figuratively and literally. The titular state of the Sharps, named Crimson Peak, is on the nose, but so beautiful for how Edith coming into their lives unearths this past and the blood that may or may not be on their hands. I'm really glad I rewatched this one, and it improved so much for me. If you like Victorian era gothic style horror, Del Toro's Crimson Peak is definitely one to check out. Up next is personally one of my favorite of Del Toro's. If it wasn't for Pan's Labyrinth, it would be number one for me. It is 2017's The Shape of Water, starring a huge cast of Sally Hawkins, Michael Shannon, Doug Jones, Richard Jenkins, Octavia Spencer, Michael Stuhlbarg, and many others. In the height of the Cold War in 1962 Maryland, our main character Eliza, a mute janitor at a top-secret government facility, one day she comes across a top-secret asset that is brought in, and she discovers that the government is holding a humanoid amphibian in captivity that was discovered in the Amazon. This is something that Del Toro does best. He puts you in the, as I said before, the middle of a political conflict or war in history as a backdrop and tells a beautiful story at the center. In this case, an incredibly romantic one. This is one that may be a bit too odd for modern audiences, even though it was only from 8 years ago. I remember when it came out, when people saw that it won Best Picture, it was very, dismissed by a lot of regular folk because on surface level, a woman falling in love with a fish, obviously that kind of comes across as very just bizarre and weird, but it isn't about that. There's so much rich subtext to this with all of our characters. Our main character, Eliza, is someone that has been mute since a baby. She literally can't talk. When constantly touching the scars on her neck from the procedure, reminding herself that she sees herself differently and not feeling like she can find the things that her friends have because of this, and because of this, as she sees defect. Her neighbor who is crushing on a local restaurant cashier through just meaningless conversations, or her best friend at work who has a long-term marriage. She feels like an outsider to these things and something that is incapable of being loved in the way that she hopes. The same can be said for the monster or the creature as a representation of someone who is seen as the other, as Del Toro mentions it in many of his interviews, by society. They are both representations of this and why they fall in love. It's a beautiful love story of two who don't belong, casted out, but are essentially meant for each other. It isn't about woman falls in love with a fish. Then in the background, you have Michael Shannon's Colonel Strickland. He sort of embodies the very cliche, typical American 60s era, white male. Has a wife, 2 kids, buys a fancy car to make himself feel young, and is in a complete power trip, and that's just who he is. While at the time the Americans were trying to win the space race with the Russians, he's trying to hold on to any control and power he has left as things are falling out of his grasp. As he gets more and more ruthless with the monster and asserting dominance, his representation of American control on being the first or the best at this time is in question with its own morality of what we do when there are elements out of our control. At the same time, America's idea of masculinity and how he had to be, a brute to gain this power, but that rarely ever worked when it came to keeping our humanity with each other and others that we don't know about. Like I said, the other, quote unquote. It becomes such an interesting juxtaposition when we are seen as the monsters versus the actual unidentifiable creature that we drudge up. On a film side, the performances are absolutely incredible and some of Del Toro's best in his films. Sally Hawkins gives a performance that was without voice and without, vocal words, but all the expression in her face and how she carries herself is what makes it so incredibly impactful. All of her loneliness and emptiness at times in her body language is something profound and heartbreaking. Shannon's villainous Colonel is also terrifying in his own right, always, like I said, asserting dominance and power over those under his purity and who he sees as inferior, and his rhetoric makes your skin crawl, and he just absolutely knocks out of the park of how good he is at this role. Obviously, like I said, this is a film that is hard to describe and recommend to the average moviegoer, but if you give it a shot and really try to invest yourself in it, I think you'll be swept up and absolutely thrilled by it. It's one of Del Toro's best movies to date, in my opinion, and that is The Shape of Water, 2018's Best Picture winner. Following up his Best Picture win is another film that went on to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. It is 2021's Nightmare Alley, the second adaptation of the book of the same name. The film follows Stan Carlisle, played by Bradley Cooper, a carnival worker with ambitious plans and a mysterious past, as he works his way up the ranks while working and perfecting mentalism on paying customers. That is a kind of basic one-dimensional summary, but it is the gist of it. I try to stay away from major plot points most of the time when describing a film, and this is definitely no exception. There's a lot to unpack with Nightmare Alley, easily one of the more thematically complex films of Del Toro's career. From the jump, you see that Carlyle has a troubled and dark past, but not sure specifically what happened or even the motivations for it. He is walking through the carnival, and almost from the first interaction, you see this carnival can represent our society, especially post war society, as America disregarded veterans or even just people who did not make it through the other end. Another big important thing I noticed with Nightmare Alley is that this feels like Del Toro's most cynical movie. Not angry, but almost like, see, the people and higher powers at play are selling you lies and will use you and your weaknesses at every step to line their pockets. You have, for example, Willem Dafoe's character, Clem, who runs this carnival for the first act, the first third. A main attraction for his roadshow is what they call geeks. These people they don't consider people and put on display as a man turned beast, someone who's inhumane and you don't want to go near. And all it really is a person who has kind of just reverted to their animal instincts. He explains to Stan at one point when they're having dinner that, and how he reels in a new geek, is he takes advantage of the hard times of either drunks, addicts, or people who are homeless and need work, but exploits their weakness to get them to work for him as this geek, and from there, entraps him into the circus. It definitely plays into that idea that America, even at its hardest times, the rich and the powerful find ways to exploit and ruin you at their own advantage and package it and sell it to people. And the people in this movie are damaged to their cores, but just really bad people. Stan almost takes Clem's ideas to a broad sense and uses people as stepping stones for his own goals, while others that are caught almost victims and not there for the same reasons. Rooney Mara's Molly is a perfect example. She almost knows what he has done, what he's about, and what he's doing to people, but helps or is caught in his product he sells to her and their love. While this does not necessarily include horror or supernatural elements like nearly every film of his, it is one of the films that makes the people in power the scariest. There is a scene that is both lovely and terrifying on a human level at its forewarning, where some of the old friends of Stan and Molly's from the carnival come to visit them in their new nice penthouse a few years since they last seen each other. They're reminiscing and remembering who they were and the family they had, but are also headstrong on reminding Stan what they wanted to do with this mentalism act from the very beginning, and not to forget why they did it or how they rectified their schemes after, by letting people, know who, what really happened and what the act was about, and not letting it too much to them. When this arises earlier in his journey, Stan asks why they tell the people and not let them believe it and give them hope. This sort of is his personality, where he tries to justify his actions and feel better doing so. Like I said, one of Del Toro's most complex and thematically deep films. It is one that I could probably talk about for hours on end, honestly. And that's not to be said about most of his other films, but this one just has so much to it. And if you do watch it and you do have a choice, I highly recommend the black and white director's cut. It is far superior to me, even though they're both great, but the black and white director's cut just adds so much richness aesthetically and just so much more context for so much. But Nightmare Alley is one that's his most recent, besides his newest live action film. Highly recommend it. The year after Nightmare Alley is Del Toro's first animated feature film. It is 2022's Pinocchio. One of his best to me, to be honest. It is heartbreaking and so sweet at the same time. It is the same story for most of the broad strokes that you know of Pinocchio, but with a fascist background in Italy in the post-World War I era. In all the iterations that I've seen, and I honestly haven't seen much, but you kind of know the story, I don't know if Pinocchio has ever been more endearing and tragic and dark, especially, like I said, with this backdrop. On its themes, war really does the worst to people and brings out the worst in people, the ones in power specifically. The military complex has always preyed upon those who are vulnerable, indoctrinating children, and or bringing children of, children being casualties of war. And then saying that it is us, it is to make us stronger, build character, tougher. There's a character in his son that is a little incarnation of this idea, and his son, Candlewick, is one of the more tragic characters and supporting characters in this, aside from Pinocchio or Geppetto, or how through times of exploitation, prominently, just like Nightmare Alley, taking advantage of those who are different, parading them around in a circus or carnival, and exploiting their innocence at an impressionable point in their lives. The biggest theme of all here is being different and loss of innocence. Like you would imagine, Pinocchio is not very welcome in this village. He's viewed as a demon or witchcraft because he's a wooden boy who can speak and walk and all that. But then the town and the people that come into contact or view of him want something from him or to exploit him. Either as the idea of a super soldier that is indestructible or a show pony in a carnival that will sell tickets. Because he's different, he's never fully given a chance to be himself or taught that it's okay to be yourself. But he also knows that he's just a boy. He's just impressionable to the point for a lot of the runtime that people can tell him something or convince him of almost anything that they want. He repeats it and believes it. Lots of the most emotional points in this film are spoiler heavy, but Del Toro does something so delicately with this that nothing ever feels so forced or tugging your heartstrings for the sake of it, like a lot of these kind of movies do. It is very sweeping with the music at times, and it is very in your face. You want to cry, but he does it with such grace and care that it's just done so well. It's just the reality of this war-torn period of time, or the exploitation of this child's innocence that is ripped away from him, that you cannot help but feel the same emotions that Pinocchio does, as he is learning all of these emotions for the first time as well. While I think it is a lot more apparent that it is an emotionally gut-wrenching film, less subtle than others, it does not take away from the simple fact that all the little details that Del Toro adds to make this such a tearjerker and hopeful film. Not to mention, the stop-motion animation is absolutely breathtaking. Some moments I had to pause and rewind because some shots they had, and again, it's all stop-motion animation, I don't know how they pulled it off, and it should be studied. There's a great little documentary on Netflix that shows the making of it, and I highly recommend if you watch this and love it, that you go out and watch that as well. He has said in recent years that he plans to step away from live action films at one point and just focus on animation for the rest of his career. And honestly, after Pinocchio, that is not something I'd be opposed to. Alright, now for the newest release from Guillermo del Toro. It is the 2025 adaptation of the 1818 Mary Shelley novel, Frankenstein. And it is obviously, everyone knows Frankenstein. There's been dozens and dozens of adaptations of it, but this is an auteur's unique vision for it, which I was all there for going into it. Trying to create life from death, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, this time played by Oscar Isaac, finally does that and creates a creature from disassembled human limbs. Jacob Elordi is playing Frankenstein's monster in this one. I love what Del Toro does with creatures and humanizes them. He finds beauty in all things living and shows that there's humanity in all of us, even if they aren't like us. Even if we aren't fully human, or at all demonstrated by some of his other works like Hellboy, Shape of Water, Pinocchio. He has this idea and he just clings onto it and is so endearing for it. He definitely nails that once again here with Jacob Elordi's Monster. This is probably the best work so far I've seen from Jacob Elordi, giving such a heartbreak and vicious and innocent performance. Even if you can see the physical attributes of Elordi in his performance, you immediately stop seeing him, and only see this monster who's been torn apart, put back together by his surrogate father. The action or set pieces or physicality he has to perform with in certain scenes are so visceral, whether it's a set piece or an emotional scene where he barely says one or two words and the emotion is all in his eyes. Specifically one where he meets a blind man that he's been helping for months in order to connect with humans. Where the film doesn't quite work well for me, that is the story and side the first half, basically, with Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Oscar Isaac is always good, and his actual performance is really good. To me, it felt like if it was that I felt we were being told a lot about his motivations and why he was doing these things and his psyche behind it, but I didn't feel it. And Del Toro can usually do a lot with these stories, but this one just didn't land for me. Maybe on a rewatch, after a few weeks or maybe a month or two, I will rewatch it and feel differently. I just did not quite buy it into the desire for the love he had. Although I thought Mia Goth was good in her role, as his love interest in a way, but there's a lot more complexity and a lot more powers at play for that side story. It made sense what was going on. I just think it was too murky for what it was trying to do. It was a little too convoluted. Although I know what it was going for, I just didn't quite buy into it. I might have just repeated myself, but sorry about that. I hope that wasn't confusing or jumbled of a thought. It just makes more sense in my head, I suppose. On a practical level, though, while there's a lot more noticeable CGI than most of Del Toro's films, the sets and costume, makeup were some of his best work. Like I said, with Elordi, you barely recognize him, and his performance does not work without the best makeup. And the best makeup does not work if you don't have a committed performance inside of it. The sets outside of the background CGI are incredible and very reminiscent of Crimson Peak and even a little bit of Pan's Labyrinth. Very creaky, majestic rooms, lavish costumes, and while all extravagant, doesn't put you on the outside, but instead transports you into this world that Guillermo wants you to live in for all of the 2.5 hours. Compared to the original Frankenstein movie, it could have been shorter for sure because there's a lot to unpack in this one and a lot to get through. I recommend the movie. It is still a good movie. It just wasn't one of his stronger outings for me personally, but I'll always be here to support Guillermo. It was so fun. I went with my wife to see it at the Chicago International Film Festival last month. It was very cool being in a packed house of hundreds of people and just seeing this for the first time and being in awe of it. Side note, I mentioned it earlier, but if you have a chance to go to the Music Box Theater in Chicago, I highly recommend it. It is, for a film lover, it is one of the best places on earth, in all honesty, in all the theaters I've ever been to. And back to Frankenstein, while personally it was on the lower end of his movies, it by no means, like I said, is a bad movie. I do recommend it if you are interested in watching it. Thank you for listening to me talk today about Guillermo del Toro and for listening to the show and keeping up with it. I know it's already November, but I did have so much fun last month talking during spooky season about horror movies, and I hope that next year I can do the same and have even more fun ideas. Next week's episode is going to be TBA. I'm still ironing out the details of what it's going to be. It should be a very fun fall movie season, so I hope to talk about a lot of that. You can keep up to date with the show on Instagram at PodWatchMovies and on Bluesky at watchmoremovies.bsky.social. Please subscribe, comment, like Apple, YouTube, or Spotify. It helps the show out a lot. The show's link tree is on both Instagram and Bluesky, so check the show out on all those platforms. And until next time, watch more movies.